Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say hello and welcome to a fresh, brand new edition of the program ASHFORD GARLEY Live on British Radio Africa. Today is June 19th, 2023, and it feels great to be back home. We're live from Lansdowne, PA. Folks, I'm pretty sure you're having a great time. In this vein, we just want to give him the praise. Father God, we want to magnify your name. Blessed be your holy name forever. Lord Jesus, we are grateful to you. And in the name of Jesus, we're giving you thanks. Some heard the name. Some heard people talk about him. You've gotten the opportunity tonight, folks. He doesn't eat iron, but he's stronger than a lion, the mastermind, the medicine of the microphone, the golden voice of radio, the broadcast commissioner. Graças tu pagege, zebando da nja ko no treji. You wouldn't know Mozu only one the madabo, but see you blue. Sikoria Epelia. Folks, this is yours truly, the giant that now you know me Garland. Welcome to the show. And it's time to say hi to my own cousin, A.B. Boblin, out of Minnesota, and Elvis Morris. I want to say congratulations to Elvis as he celebrates his birthday today. And Elvis, let us sure hope that you live to see many, many more birthdays to come. And of course, folks, don't be selfish. Do us a favor, share the video, and so that we can together have a blast tonight. Very shortly, I will link you up with my panelists so that we can have a great time. It's time to say hi to a friend of Big Brother, Mr. Vayu Wesson, who you having a great time tonight. I also like to say hi to Toka Righteous out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hope you guys are doing well tonight. Welcome to the show. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joshua.
Thank you.
I want to begin with the coach, Coach Q. How was your weekend?
Weekend was good, relaxed, spent time with the family. That's always good. You know, just took it in and we had a long weekend. So today was a good day just to add to the weekend, but I was looking forward to having this conversation tonight. And it was a wonderful weekend.
Okay. Dr. Fisk, how was your weekend?
Ashford, and greetings to the listening and viewing public out there. I'm on weekend. This I always work during weekends and have opportunity to interact with family as well. And go to church, take family to church, and the rest of it. So, I mean, it was wonderful, and I just look forward again to another explosive edition of Ashford Garley Live with British Radio. Thank you.
Idris, tell us about your weekend.
Well, my greetings to all of you wonderful Liberians and awesome panelists. I look forward to having wonderful discussions regarding our country, some wonderful discussions regarding our country. I had a great weekend, celebrated Father's Day with my family and church members. It was exciting, and I'm glad to yet be alive one more day. To God be the glory. Thank you.
Okay, well, the menu tonight is you have to be 21 years old or older to be able to consume alcohol. The menu, we have dry rice with fried fish, a little bit of spice, and we also have cooking water. And tonight in the show, and we have a lot of single ladies on the menu tonight. That is why don't you walk us through the menu, the political menu for tonight.
Yeah, certainly what is trending is the finance minister and the commissioner for maritime, Eugene Nangwe, and of course, Tue, Minister Tue, painted a picture to the Liberian people that Liberia is doing very well under President George Weah. A report that will be scrutinized by all of us, esteemed panelists and the Liberian people as well, who are currently experiencing the challenges within Liberia. So whether or not their livelihood lines up to the positive and rosy picture painted by the finance minister. And certainly we have the chairman of the governance commission, Mr. Yelu, actively participating in politics, which is something he's not supposed to be doing, as he has, made public his endorsement for President George Weah, something that contravenes with the election coordinating committee's code of conduct 5.3.4. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me just go to Dr. Face. You heard you heard Idatus clearly talked about the menu tonight. What is your take on the menu tonight? Just before we begin talking about the commentary, I want you to come in and tell us about your take on the menu tonight. Then we'll go to Coach Kill, and we're gonna take a look at the commentary tonight.
I mean, the thing is, thank you. We were having a discussion off air, and you said the minister had informed the Liberian people that during the administration of George Weah, I don't know whether it was the first term or whatever term, 24,000 jobs were created. If we assume the adult working population of Liberia to be 2 million or 2.5 million, other population of 5 million, or even if we look at it to be 3 million people who are actually of working age, what he has said is that the government of George Weah have been able to create less than 1% of George. That is if we give him the benefit of the doubt. And then we have to ask ourselves, what kind of jobs are we talking about? Because the evidence of that is seen in Clarendon, where instead of creating factories in Clarendon, he opened a soccer pitch, okay? And you have a lot of Zogos in the country, you have an increase in crime rate. So, and then it is my understanding that he said that, oh, you don't take my word for it, you have to look at the World Bank. Well, when Ellen was president, she had a lot of international accolades and information that was coming out from the international community praising her administration. But was that reflected in the ordinary lives of Liberians? No. And what she did was repudiated by the Liberian people when they elected George Weah as president.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's a bunch of baloney. Nothing he says make any sense.
Okay, thank you. Coach Q?
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, couple of things. When you live in a democracy, the rule of law matters. So it seems like we're echoing the same conversation from before. You cannot have a contradiction, or you cannot have a government official serving two masters. If you're going to participate in politics, you cannot be part of the government, especially serving in that role. So First thing is, I do not believe George Weah and his government respects the Liberian people. They do not respect the rule of law. If you're going to spew out numbers that certainly don't make any sense to Liberian people, the least you can do is not try to punt the ball down the field and tell us exactly which sectors you created these jobs in. Don't tell me go ask the UN. And I like when he say things like this because what it does when the Liberian people hear it is they feel insulted. Right? I was just home again. Our people are hurting. For those of you guys who haven't been home recently, you're not going to go to a country that you're proud of. It's not because our people aren't hardworking. It's not because our people don't care. It's not because our people want to be beggars. They certainly do not care.
Thank
So
you.
when you talk about creating jobs, are you paying livable wages? Whereas the Liberian person can actually take care of his basic need and have a little bit to save. Secondly, are you creating private sector jobs? To me, just throwing out numbers and saying names is disrespectful. It is callous. It is crass because our people are certainly hurting, and you're playing games because you have some government title and you could be on the radio. It's a spit in the face of our people.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, let him continue to say that, and the people continue to hear what they're hearing, and
Thank
they're
you.
going to make a decision.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present to you the third episode of Bridge Editorial Commentary. This program is aired, or the segment is aired every Monday at the top of the program when the presenter uses 2 minutes to provide a profound and critically researched analysis of what I consider the most pressing issue of the week before. Today's presenter is no other than Dr. James D. Face as he talks about systemic corruption in Liberia. Dr. Face, take it away.
Thank you, Ashford. So today my topic is economic scarcity and the specter of corruption in the Liberian government. So greetings once more. My topic is focused on corruption in government using scarcity as a background. To follow this discussion, it is important to define some of the important concepts. Corruption comes from a special form of Latin verb, to break, which implies that something is badly broken. The World Bank defines corruption as the abuse of public office for private gain, while Transparency International views corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. In other words, corruption is the act of using what is public to accomplish private goals. The literature on corruption lists many reasons for this phenomenon, but the focus here is on the correlation between corruption and scarcity. The reason for this is that scarcity defines the limited availability of resources that are in unlimited demand. African countries generally tend to have weak and fragile institutions. As a result, the private sector in African countries tend to be relatively small and weak as compared to economies elsewhere. Scarcity in these economies means that the decisions about who gets what, when, and how fall within the purview of political actors and bureaucrats who themselves are poor. Being prone to a scarcity mindset, political actors and bureaucrats are forced into suboptimal decisions and behaviors that breed corruption. Among many reasons for the aforementioned is that after independence, most African countries drifted shamelessly from a bureaucratic administration that emphasized good governance to one that emphasized the sovereignty of politics. This resulted in the emergence of politicized bureaucracies, which began to engage in centralized economic decision-making and patrimonialism. The new states were not only bureaucratic autocracies, but also political and economic monopolies now lacking in accountability, transparency, and the rule of law. In essence, the irony is that most African countries have become democratically elected kleptocracies. One sad example is that sub-Saharan Africa continues to remain the lowest performer on the Corruption Perception Index, that's the CPI, with an average score of 32. Transparency International CPI Index of 2022, published in January 2023, places Liberia at number 26 on the scale that ranges from 0 to 100. 100 means a country is corrupt-free, and 0 means a country is irredeemably corrupt. Under George Weah, Liberia is below the regional CPI average, but has always been below the international CPI average under Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. The African Union has estimated that during the 1990s, corruption was costing African economies about $148 billion a year, or about 26% of Africa's total output. Other reports show that in 1 year, corrupt African politicians and civil servants diverted amounts of more than 30 billion in development aid to foreign bank accounts. In other words, corruption in Africa has reached cancerous proportions. In fact, so pervasive is the phenomenon that in the region that it has been labeled the AIDS of democracy, which is destroying the future of many societies in Africa. In addition to reasons of legitimacy, one can speculate that the clandestine nature by which corruption is practiced produces a natural barrier against steps to get rid of it. For example, in Liberia, laws are how corrupt practices are protected. Many solutions to curb corruption have been suggested, while others need enforcement. Rufus Newville recently proposed a reduction in pay of members of the national legislature by up to 20%. When he was initially elected, Darius DeLon questioned the pay of the legislature despite rampant economic poverty in Liberia. Accountability required Weah to audit the previous government. And all presidential contenders, including Weah, need to declare their assets before availing themselves to seek the people's mandate to lead. Even if these individuals cannot accomplish the latter, another way to address corruption would be to reduce scarcity by presenting to the people plans for massive jobs and wealth creation. Thank you.
I would like to say a big thanks to Dr. Fisk for that splendid presentation of the third episode on corruption. Mrs. Letty Brooks Roberts, the program starts at 8 o'clock and not 8:15 or 8:20. Welcome to the show.
I do apologize. Good evening, guys. How are you? Thank you.
Okay.
Happy Juneteenth and happy belated Father's Day to you all.
Thank you. Idatis, what do you make of the piece read there by Dr. Fisk? I want to hear from you, hear from Coach Q, and we'll have a special guest who's going to touch on the economy. The name is Professor Lawrence Kennedy. Kennedy is back studio right now, and pretty sure as soon as you guys address talked about this episode, we're going to be bringing him live on the show. Idatis had it.
Well, I certainly want to appreciate Dr. Fisk for such a splendid display, a complete contradiction to what the finance minister attempted to do today and politicize the ineptitude, incompetency, as well as the failed policy of 292 promises made by the president, and only 8% could be tracked, which is 24 in terms of its accomplishment, according to the NAMUS report. So Dr. Fisk, thank you. That was an excellent summary of, quite frankly, the state of Liberia's economy and the impact of corruption. What the finance minister also failed to recognize is that he didn't look at the IMF report, the country's report volume 2021, that certainly stated, because he was using this, this flowery word, stock inheritance, as a way to communicate what they inherited from previous government. So in his conference today, he stated that they inherited 2 million people who were poor. In other words, on the international standard, Liberians live on $1.90. So, but he didn't realize that the IMF countries report said that um, Liberia's poverty increased to 2.3 million. So, quite frankly, on their watch, more people were added to poverty, as evidenced by number one, the harmonization. All right, the president in his State of the Nation address stated that after almost 5.5 years, 5.5 years, that he just realized Liberians were living on the minimum wage of the country. So how then can you tell Liberians that they aren't living in poverty and in fact they're doing very well? So that was a total contradiction, and it's very clear that they directed much of their criticism to the previous government and target Joseph Boyka because they recognize the momentum at which this country
Thank
is
you,
moving
David.
now in the context of the opposition. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Coach Q, please unmute your device.
Again, thanks for the piece. It was very informational. Just a comment on the piece I was reading, right? What I got from that is, how do you scarcity is a major issue, right? And it points right to the haves and the have-nots, right? There is very little to have, and a few people have a monopoly on it. How do you reduce scarcity? Okay, and that's what I'm listening for was listening for in the piece, and that's what I heard. Okay, how do you break this? Another terms I'll use: political monopoly. Okay, and this is what is perpetuating this scarcity. Liberians need to try something new, right? We cannot go back to 1847 type politics. We need new things. Here's some things I was just writing down that we need. Okay. We've
Now,
never had a
30
job
seconds, please.
creation bill that focuses on young people. We need to do that. Okay. Like restoring old government, just a low skilled job creation bill. Okay. We've never intentionally taken care of our old folks. Okay, and intentionally put money in young folks' pocket, just like many nations did. Put money in the hands of spenders, okay, and retire those who were safe.
10
Okay,
seconds.
we've never done that. Okay, a couple of things in that, and we've never taken advantage of this renewable energy that's coming up, right? This green revolution, this real green revolution, not the Joseph Boycott 488 stolen green revolution. I'm talking about this renewable energy revolution. Okay, Liberia has so much to offer. We just need a responsible government that intentionally and purposely puts its people first. Give our people money so that they're able to compete with the foreigners
Thank
who
you,
are
Coach Q.
monopolizing our economy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mrs. Letty Bush Roberts.
Yes, thank you. Good evening again. Welcome to our guests. But when I listened to firstly, I want to say thank you to Dr. Fitz for that beautiful piece. When I listened to Samuel Tuer today, before I went all through the whole interview, the first question asked was, "What did you inherit from the previous government?" And just because of the person he is, he went all the way down the street and not answer the question. He went back to blaming and all of everything all of those, terminology and fast talking, and didn't answer the question. The interviewer had to go back and ask him. So in conjunction with the error he made and that was pointed out to him, 27 million when Liberia only has 4 point something million at this time. How do you justify such, lie? Then he continued and states figures that even he cannot remember. I think he was reading from something, but it's just so sad to see at the 11th hour these guys are still trying to sell Liberia a piece of
Thank you.
lie when they have lived
Thank you, Mrs. Roberts.
everything
Well,
that
ladies and
they're
gentlemen,
going through. I thank you.
thank you. Well, at this time, I'd like to introduce to you Larry Kennedy. Larry Kennedy is a Liberian professional economist that resides here in these United States of America. Uh, Mr. Kennedy, please tell us a little bit about yourself within 2 minutes, and then I'll play the clip from today's conference hosted by Samuel Toet and Eugene Nangwe. Mr. Kennedy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Mr. Garley. And I want to say thanks to your panelists, Madam Roberts, Dr. Fisk. Just enjoyed listening to you just now. Mr. Eddie, having met you before, it's a pleasure meeting you. And also Mr. Conway, pleasure meeting you guys. Larry Kennedy, I rarely try to get into a lot of these issues or discussions with Liberia because it just seems like the people that just don't seem to get it, that they're poor by design. My background, I worked a little over 25 years for JP Morgan Chase. I was vice president in an investment bank. I managed a team over in New York, in Delaware, in London, and also in Bangalore. In addition to that, I've been doing a lot of finance and economic teaching. I do a lot of data analytics teaching as well for some of the colleges on the East Coast. And I've spent about 36 months, over a little over 3 years. I was going to do my actual dissertation on something related to financial innovation, but I decided to understand why is it that Liberia, despite receiving billions in aid from the OECD, from US government, why is it that Liberia still remains poor after 170 years? When you take countries that have absolutely nothing, like Hong Kong, that's a piece of rock. You take Singapore, which the Ambassador McCarthy spoke about one time. You take countries like Botswana, 57 years old. How is it these countries have managed to be successful? The three tigers, Taiwan, Singapore, Thailand. Oh, these countries were extremely poor. Their GDP per capita was so far below Liberia. But today, Singapore has a GDP per capita of over 79,000 per person, which is higher than the US. They actually passed the US right around the time COVID hit. But look at Singapore, that Liberia was doing so much better than. Liberia has a GDP per capita under this administration of about $672. And you had Singapore 79,000 per person. How is that possible? That people are being poor by design. And you have to understand when you have a finance minister that plays with words, that says numbers that makes absolutely no sense, and people just buy into it. And then you hear people chanting, singing all these chants. You kept poor by design. You have all of the resources, everything you need, but you actually kept poor by design. Sometimes talking about it. So over back to you, Mr. Garland.
Okay, now speaking of a finance minister that plays with words, I want to play the clip here from today's conference held at the state-owned broadcast system station ELBC. And then Kennedy, you can come in and interpret some of the things that the finance minister said, and then my panelists will go right away in the room and ask you a few questions. Let us take a listen.
Inherited a given stock. Economists and pundits had perceptions about the country situation. There were certain narratives about Liberia before. We ourselves, in writing the PAPD, held certain things constant, meaning we had certain beliefs about macroeconomic foundation. Assumptions were made about those things in the PAPD. So when a new president takes office, he has to stand on what he received. The president, for example, inherited 2 million people living in extreme poverty. That's one inheritance. So when George Weah took the oath of office, there were 2 million Liberians in extreme poverty. World Bank, this is not Samuel Toet. I will refer all of you to the latest World Bank report on investing in human capital. If I have the time, I'll show you that here so you can contact that. Page 20.
Well, when George Weah took over, there were 2+ million Liberians in poverty. And he went further to let us say that In no time, 24,000 Liberians received or got new jobs. And look at the ratio, look at the gap there. But you are the expert, Mr. Kennedy. I want you to come in, and of course, the guys can ask you the question if they have.
So if you pay close attention to what Mr. Twe was saying, first he started off by saying 27,000, right? Because first he said 27 million, and then he was corrected. Then he said 27,000 were given, were raised out of
I mean,
poverty. Then he changed.
27 million, we can clearly understand that it was a. I mean,
No, but he said then he changed it to 27,000. But now you hear he was saying 24,000. So we can't seem to get the right number, right? So he said 27.
After he went back and read the actual report, it was actually 24,000 as opposed to 27,000.
Right. So here's the thing. Where is he grabbing the data source in terms of the 24,000? Because if you ask them how many jobs they created, they do not have a database that can show you how many jobs they actually created. They do not. Because here's the thing. The people who actually, the statistical institution, LISGIS, that's supposed to grab all of this data, they're letting the finance ministry do the data gathering for the country. So the finance ministry is actually a player and a referee in the same game. If you were to go and take a look over at the central bank report, the most recent annual report from the central bank from 2022, what they have in that report is actually coming from the Ministry of Finance, but it's not even the actual report. They're saying it's sort of a draft. So they still haven't given us the actual numbers. They don't have a jobs data bank. Over in the US, we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We can even look at FRED, the Federal Reserve Economic Data Bank, to get some actual data in terms of the jobs that is created. They don't have it. Even worse than that, the population is growing at a rate of 3% per year. The poverty reduction strategy, the economy has to grow at around 9% in order to just meet up. The most recent census, they said each family has about 4.4 members in the family. We have a very fertile young group of people in that country that are having babies quickly. We're not keeping up with the population. The numbers Twain is giving, I don't want to use, I don't want to say it. It's just, it's nonsense. It makes absolutely no sense.
But then who has the real numbers? What are the numbers? According to Twain, he got them from the World Bank.
They're making up a lot of these numbers. Here's the thing what you need to do. What Twain says in public is actually different than what he actually sends to the IMF when he's begging for money. I saw Brother Addy mention earlier in terms of looking at the IMF data. If you go into the IMF and you figure out and you see the letter that Twain wrote to Georgina, to the head of the IMF, the managing director, before they enter the extended credit facility, go in there and read that actual letter. The letter tells you the true story of what these guys are going through in terms of the struggles with the economy. Then he comes out in public and he said they're doing all these marvelous things. It's two-faced. And nobody is really fact-checking them on the opposition. If no one is checking you in the opposition, you can say Liberia will send a man to the moon in 2026, and people will believe that nonsense.
That's the voice of Lawrence Kennedy. With less than 4 months to go to election, somebody has to fix this. The numbers of employment and how we can grow the economy. But I will bring in Dr. Fisk. Perhaps he has something for you. Dr. Fisk?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. At first, I want to make a comment and then I will ask a question. So the comment is this: between 1847 and 1947, that's 100 years. Liberia basically had nothing to offer the international community in terms of trade. Okay, the idea of Liberia being a major international partner began with Firestone. That was in 1920. But Firestone started exporting later on. The first exportation from Liberia of iron ore, which was significant for the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War, was 1950. Okay, the Berlin Conference that led to the Partition of Africa was 1884. So 37 years after Liberia was independent, the rest of Africa was partitioned. So I think we need to give credit where credit is due to those people who were able to keep us independent, even after the rest of Africa were being put under varying colonial powers. So to come to the issue that I want to ask, I've always argued on this platform that when the international community talked about creating an enabling environment, that was based on certain assumptions that are Western oriented. That in fact, if you talk about what's obtaining in Africa, it is up to Africans to develop a structure that will be able to take their own people out of poverty rather than to rely on some DFI, direct foreign investment. Okay, so one of the solutions I've always talked about is direct government involvement in trying to create factories all across Liberia. And in one of those areas they can concentrate on is rice production, because the technology is out there to be purchased. It doesn't necessarily have to be government to government. And if you do the purchase of rice, and within 3 to 4 years, you completely halt importation of rice into Liberia, what you end up doing is decentralizing the country because people go to look for jobs. You end up increasing the currency, Liberian currency, because now you have people purchasing, you have more jobs created. Because I was looking at some reports before when I was doing a piece for this particular show, and I saw that Denmark, 35% of our population, employed population, is actually in public sector. So help us to clarify, because I've had political actors come on this show and say government shouldn't do anything, and it doesn't make any sense, especially for where Liberia is significant unemployment. The history of America says that during the Great Depression, American government was fully involved in public sector job creation as it was trying to stabilize the economy. Thank you.
Well, what was the question? The actual question behind it? It sounded like
so the question is, do we or do we not embrace the idea that government should actually be involved in public sector job creation, as in agri-industries, for instance, as a way of trying to balance the economy, increase job production, decentralization, build up the currency, and the rest of it, versus the private sector, when in fact we almost don't have a private sector. If we do, it is actually controlled by expatriates.
So if you look at the mandate that established the Central Bank of Liberia, when you read that mandate, it tells you the key functions of the central bank. The central bank is meant to stabilize the economy. The central bank is meant to create monetary policy that will lead to economic growth. The central bank is meant to also create jobs in the form of, some monetary policy that will lead to job creation. The central bank also has a mandate to keep inflation at bay, to maintain inflation. So the central bank by itself sets monetary policy that would create the environment to create jobs. So the government has that functioning role. The government has that functioning role because the central bank is the government's bank, is the banker's bank, right? So when we start with that, knowing the central bank mandate, then we go to the second part. So on the fiscal side now, which is where the government, the executive branch comes in play, they are supposed to create the enabling environment, meaning they're doing business. If you look at the doing business report, how easy can you create or start or license a job in Liberia? That is extremely challenging. So the government, by creating the enabling environment, they can also help in creating jobs. Because then you also have LBDI, which is really doing things that it really shouldn't be doing. But LBDI should also be able to create that environment where people can have access to capital to do investments in agriculture and the private sector side. So yes, the government is partly responsible in the sense that it creates the enabling environment for the private sector, because without the government, the private sector will not do anything, right? Because, for example, if I come to Liberia, I want to start a business, and somebody were to dupe me, we were just discussing corruption, and we talk about, I think there's I've been reading about a judge who has swindled some people, private investors' money. If you don't have a fair judicial system, you don't have a court that can deal with matters of that at that level, you're not going to encourage investors to come over there. One thing people on Wall Street, and I work over at 60 Wall Street for over 25 years, if we're looking for places to invest in, we're looking at the rule of law. Because if anything were to happen, can I go to court and have this matter adjudicated to get my money out of it? Liberia doesn't have that set of rule of law. It's a big issue. What is monetary policy? The monetary policy in Liberia is not even effective. It's not really effective. So yes, the government holds a lot of responsibility in the job creation. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Dr. Fisk, or you want to move the doctors?
I mean, my only follow-up would be this, right? You mentioned that you have all of these banks with all of these mandates, and most of those mandates have to do with infusing capital to individuals to set up these institutions that will create jobs. But we don't have the momentum because, number one, a lot of people don't have the experience, whether in terms of running these factories or in terms of trying to set them up in the first place. So the question then still remains, because we are looking at a situation where we have massive job employment. Liberia needs to have an employment of up to at least 500,000 people before we can actually stabilize the economy. So even though you have all of these institutions, the fact that they have not been working as properly as they should, the question still remains, do we have an actual direct involvement on the part of government? Because mind you now, like I understood from my research, the government is heavily involved in public sector job creation. For instance, in the security sector area, like the military, that's public sector job creation. So I was just trying to say, okay, fine. So since we have the military, we have the police, have all of those security apparatus. Can we extend that into the economic sector where we create agro-industry factories? So that was the question, because we have these institutions, but these institutions have failed. And mind you, the people continue to bleed. They don't have work. I'm just trying to find a way to address the situation as it is.
Dr. Fisk, great question. One of the things that Nelson Mandela said is knowledge is the weapon that we can use to change the world. Great question, Dr. Fisk. One of the factors that will help grow a country is labor, right? But we're in an environment today where it's not so much of physical labor, it's actually knowledge based. The government runs the educational system to a greater extent. They set the rules for the educational system. Places like Philippines that don't have, I wouldn't even say like 40% of the resources that we have in Liberia. But what Philippines has done, have done, they're educated the population. They've actually spent a lot of money in education in the population. And when you look at a report from the ECOWAS nation, Liberia spends a fraction of its GDP on education. They're not meeting the mandate set by ECOWAS. We need to invest in education to give the people the capacity that you just mentioned that is lacking to do what is needed done to grow their business. And another thing real quick, look at the percentage of non-performing loans in the country. When you look at the central bank data, people do not pay back the money that is loaned to them. Why? Because sometimes these entities like
we lost him. Having some technical glitch there. We will bring him back as soon as he resurfaces.
Grace, see Grace. Hems vocal, Liberia number one vocal, Liberia number one, right? Okay.
The phrase, a new sheriff is in town, does not only belong to law enforcement. How about the introduction of Liberia's premier vodka, a quality and customized liquor for all occasions? Try the flavor of your choice. Hems Vodka, Hems Honey, Hems Bitter, and Hems Original Vodka. Hems Vodka has no hangover. That's why they say Papa drink Mama happy. Hems Vodka is sold in all stores, shops, supermarkets, and entertainment centers in Liberia. For wholesale, contact Hems Vodka at 0777 001114, 0777 000 979. We can also be reached via social media on Facebook and IG at Hems Vodka or www.hensvodka.com. In the United States, please contact Hems North America Incorporated at 610-543-9289, 888-1622, 484-755-8411. Hans Vodka is approved by the U.S. federal government. Hans Vodka brings out the real man in you.
I tell you, in my boy, in my blood. Every time when I say,
Okay, Canada is back.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You know, the
little
hands
technical
got
issue.
I said, Papa, drink mama happy. You know, so I like that.
To Doc's point, again, we have to invest in education. And when you do, you will turn Liberia around. Because you see, one of the issues that Ghana ran into with all of the borrowing, all of the great credit ratings that Ghana had, they didn't invest in something to grow their economy. That's why when it came time to start paying back the debt, they ran into issues. And that's why now we see Ghana running over to the IMF for to get bailed out. So Liberia has great potential. We have everything we need to actually grow the economy. We don't have very bad neighbors. We're not landlocked, meaning we don't have to go through another country to get to the seaport. We have everything we need. The reason we're not getting there, we just don't have people in positions based on meritocracy. When you talk to people over in Botswana, you talk to what made Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore do so well. You talk to all these countries that have done extremely well. They were putting people in position based on their ability to do their job, not because we're from the same tribe, not because we play on the same football team. You have jersey number 14, I had 16. None of that stuff. It was really based on merit. So that's why we actually need to get this thing done, Doc.
Thank you.
At this time, we want to bring in the Reverend Idatus Added, and after Idatus, for political purposes, we're going to go to that is after Mr. Kennedy responds. Then we're going to go to Coach Q. Coach Q supports Alexander Cummings, who wants to be president of Liberia. Idatus Added supports Joseph Yamabota, who also wants to be president of Liberia. We are thinking from day one, in the first 100 days, which one of these people, when given the chance to lead, can jumpstart the economy within the first 100 days? Idatus Added, Mr. Kennedy is listening to you.
So am I asking him a question, or I'm stating who can jumpstart the economy?
No, you're asking him a question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Kennedy, thank you for such an illuminating knowledge of information for our audience. The IMF report states that some 2.3 million Liberians are currently in poverty, and the finance minister is claiming that they inherited 2 million people from the previous government. Reconcile that for us, compound it with the U.S. Department of State report in 2022, investment climate report that stated that we are chronically underdeveloped in the areas of our education and health. Is the finance minister also the one that should be regulating currency as stated today? Thank you.
You're saying the finance minister should regulate currency? Is that what you ask?
Should he be the one regulating currency among several other things? Because in his explanation today, and I stand corrected, it appears like he made a statement that the central bank was doing so many things that appear to be wrong, and the IMF advised him otherwise because what they were doing was dig hole, cover hole, and that is why they were doing all of these financing to accomplish many of these projects. But the fact that he stated they inherited 2 million people, but the IMF stated that right now we are currently at 2.3 million people in poverty, especially in the rural area where there's 71.7%, and that of the general population of 68%, compounded with the U.S. State Department on Investment Climate that stated we are chronically uneducated and underdeveloped under this administration. What say you?
So, two things. One, the finance minister always try to play the role of finance minister and central bank governor. If you look at it, even going back to the Crow report and looking at the infusion of money or trying to mop up money off the Liberian economy, you will notice that he was deeply involved in that as well. In terms of the poverty rate, the poverty rate in Liberia, that number has been constant for a very long time. The war has such a bad impact. It's been constant for a very long time. So, but the problem is the finance minister sometimes get involved in discussing things that he's not an expert on. You know, he's an economist, I guess, by education and profession that he worked over in the African Development Bank. But in terms of like international finance and some of the other things you need to like raise money, raise capital, raise your sovereign debt rating to borrow money, because you notice that they didn't understand this whole business of borrowing money when they ran to Eton. And Eton, that company was just a bogus company and they suckered them. They even ratified a law to do a loan with actually Eton that didn't exist. So there are instances where we know the finance minister have made statements that is just not accurate on the issue of the 2 point something million in poverty. Yeah, they actually did inherit a lot of the poverty level from Madam's Relief Administration. It was actually really, really, really high. The problem is when it came in, things went sideways because the GDP per capita when it came in, I believe was around $722. But today, the GDP per capita for the population has fallen from 722 where they met it to actually around $675. So the economy hasn't grown. So how do you get people out of poverty when there's a relationship between income and alleviating poverty? Because think about it, Mr. Addy, if you don't have a job, how do you actually get your family out of poverty if you're not making money or your money has fallen? It doesn't make sense. And when it doesn't make sense or it sounds too good to be true, it usually isn't true. They haven't really alleviated poverty at all. The numbers just doesn't add up. The economy hasn't grown. The GDP per capita hasn't grown. The population is growing. So that means more people are coming into the population and falling into poverty. And that's where we stand right now. That's where we stand right now.
Thank you. Mr. Candidate. Coach Q?
So yeah, great discussion. I want to start at something that you said. You talked about meritocracy, Mr. Kennedy, and monopolies are the exact opposite of meritocracy, because what they do is that they arbitrarily pick people to lead, right, or to get certain services, goods, and services. And when you talk about another phrase, when you said we are poor by design, I thought that was very powerful too. There's so many directions we can go with that. Let's first talk about Singapore. You mentioned how Singapore's GDP was lower than ours. I wanted to add something else to that, which was Singapore illiteracy rate was also very, very, very high, right? In the 80 percentile. Plus, they didn't have the natural resources we did. What Singapore did was they intentionally and purposely designed the economy using mercantilism. Okay, I want to say that when you listen to Samuel Tuet, these are the type of people that have made our people stop believing that education matters, because these people are jargon's King Kong. They would throw jargons at you from their whatever textbook they use. Here's my question. Mr. Cummings believes in mercantilism, which is simply taking government money and supporting businesses. He doesn't have to be a business person to understand that. He also believes in this thing called sovereign wealth fund. You talk about tiger states like Hong Kong, Singapore, these countries. Saudi Arabia is a new country that uses sovereign wealth fund. I would like you to talk a little bit about that, which is taking a country and running nations as a business. That is one of Mr. Cummings' biggest thing that he believes that he should do. Yes, the rule of law is number one, where countries know that he's doing business, accountability matters, and the government is going to make sure everyone's accountable. Sovereign wealth fund. We haven't heard people talk about that in government and running the country as if it's a big business like everybody else. First, I want you to tell Liberian people, is this a new trend that nations are in fact using sovereign wealth funds to run countries and using mercantilism, which is government infused money and supporting business to grow the economy so that we have this disposable income that people can actually pay back loans when they do borrow them.
Coach, great points you made, and I want people to pay close attention to what Coach just said. Right, one of the core principles of money and banking is information is the basis for decision making. We don't make decisions unless we actually have the data to support it, right? Because there's a saying that, hey, if you don't have the data to back what it is that you're saying, you're just another person with an opinion. But Coach is making a good point. One of the things we need to do to actually start building the country is to actually build a data warehouse. We need to collect a ton of data. We need to understand how the country, the economy actually works. Okay, I'll get to his point real quick in terms of the sovereign wealth fund. You know, if you really want to build, I'm not sure you can actually succeed in building a country from a perspective as a business. You do need to have some business standards in there in terms of your credit, right? Businesses do have credit. Over here in the US, we use Dun and Bradstreet for credit. Countries do have credit because they use Fitch, they use Moody's, they also use Standard and Poor's. We don't have a credit rating. When you look at the ECOWAS country, one of the countries like Ghana had credit rating, which has actually tanked. But you do need to run it in a sense like business. But on the point you made in terms of monopoly, well, there are legal monopolies. And the reason why you have legal monopolies is because if it's going to cost me to come to Liberia to set up a wind farm or to use solar or to set up a solar farm, that investment is it's such a heavy investment that I would want to sign a contract for a long period of time, giving me sort of a monopoly to recover my cost. So in that sense, you can do a legal monopoly. But you have a cartel running the whole business of rice in our country. You actually have a legal cartel running the importation of rice. We need to put a stop to that. One of the first executive orders that President Weah signed was extending the rice cartel, that monopoly, to actually import rice into the country. Madam Sirleaf started that. Well, I don't know if it went before she did, maybe with Taylor, but I know she got into office and she started doing this whole executive order to give them the legal right, to bring rice in. But I'm not going to dwell on that. Yes, if you want to actually bring money into the country, we know Liberia had a high amount of remittances coming in that was helping the government. What you need to do is to set up some of these investment funds and have Liberians in the diaspora invest in it. Let Liberians in the diaspora invest in it. One of the things that you said constantly try to do is, I'm not going to get into what I'm actually doing right now in terms of my job, because for security reasons it's restricted. I can dive into it. But what we have to do is we have to connect foreign investors to local Liberian people in there in order to make them work and bring foreign direct investments into the country. That's one strategy. Set up a foreign investment funds for Liberian in the diaspora to also invest in Liberia. That's how you bring money in there. But in order to succeed, Coach, you need a government that people can trust. How do I trust a government that when they first came in, we had the whole situation of money going missing, the whole $1 billion scenario? And the funny thing about it, the Minister of Finance, in his little presentation today, he blamed the inflation. He said they inherited a bad economy. The inflation actually took place because the amount of money in the economy grew to about 36%. There's a correlation between the amount of money in your economy and inflation. And where did all that money come from? It was some of that missing money that was circulating around in the economy. So you need a government you can actually trust. But Liberians in the diaspora, investing in Liberia in an investment fund, they can actually rescue the country. Absolutely, that's part of the rescue package there.
Thank you. Mrs. Letty Brooks Rabbit.
Good evening. Thank you, Larry, for availing yourself. When I listened to the interview today, the exact thing that's happening now came to my mind. I said, how come these interviewers do not have seasoned economists to counter or to ask questions that are economy based to this gentleman who leads our country economy, comes on and talks how great it is, and the people do not feel the effects of it. But I have something here that I want to just ask you. Maybe these are some of the things he wants to post up. According to the World Bank, it says Liberia's current account balance improved in 2022, thanks to the booming gold export. Despite higher global prices for food and fuel, of which Liberia is a net importer, the current account deficit narrowed to 15.7 of the GDP, down from 17.8% in 2021. So could that be some of what this Samuel Twe is trying to boast of, even though we don't feel, or Liberians do not feel, the impact?
No, but the current account balance is just, it just kind of explains, the current account balance simply explains that we're importing a lot more than we're actually exporting. And the risk with that being, this is why you have capital flight. Nothing actually stays in the country. As soon as, money come in, whether it's remittances or collecting taxes or any revenue, all of that money goes right out of the country. In the fact that we're buying everything, a lot of what we need is being imported into the country. The U.S., for example, the U.S. produces everything it consumes. It produces everything that it consumes. Liberia, we do not. He can brag about the current account balance, but that doesn't help Liberians because the only thing that it does for them is just say that, hey, he's just kind of making it obvious that, look, we're still importing a lot more than we're actually exporting. So it doesn't do anything for the people.
Not.
And when pressed on the bread and butter issues, he also stated that the rice prices went down since under their administration. So it was say $16 when Madam Sirleaf was there, and they brought it down to 13. I'm not sure if that's true, but we have to call and look it up.
No, so you see the thing about it, another core principle of finance and banking is let the market determine prices. But the market in Liberia doesn't determine prices, because if the market did, the price of rice would actually shoot right through the roof, right? But they're intentionally holding the price of rice at a certain level because they know the whole issue with rice. You remember recently, I don't know, it was earlier this year, you saw a whole lot of people standing online because there was an artificial rice shortage.
Yes.
Because the rice importers were actually hoarding the rice because the government was forcing them to sell it at a certain price. The market wasn't determining the price. So when it stopped this artificial suppression of the price is going to shoot right through the roof. It's going to shoot right through the roof. So they're trying to control the price of rice. In the short term, it works. In the long term, it does not work. I've seen so many countries try that strategy. It does not work at all for the long term.
But, Lawrence, one of the things that Tua said today, I know we always said government is continuity. You don't have to blame the previous government. But he went further to say that drivers for certain ministers were making to the tune of $1,500 as opposed to other drivers making $300. And then medical doctors, those who are health practitioners, were making less than $500. But then when President Weah took away, he said, you know what, we have to do something because these people are taking care of the health and the wealth of the country. So they went in, and that's when you start to see doctors making $2,000, and then doctors were able to leave the country for further studies. So I believe, when they came, you have government officials, ministers making $20,000, $25,000. And Tua even admitted that he was making $7,000 as just a consultant at the finance ministry. Now he makes less than what he made as consultant at the Ministry of Finance.
You have government officials making more money than state senators in New York. Think about that for a second. Liberia, government officials, Liberia with a GDP per capita of $675. Government officials are making more money than senators in New York State, one of the richest states in the entire world. How is that possible? We have made being a public official so rewarding that everybody. That's why you see all day on social media, it's all politics. Everybody want to become a politician. Everybody's running for this office and that office. We don't value educators. We do not value the health workers. The health workers are sometimes the last to get paid. It's kind of strange that health workers have to go on the picket line sometimes to get their salary. We don't value that stuff. But the craziness is when government officials get sick, they fly out of the country and they leave the poor people in there to deal with the system that they are supposed to manage. It's insane. That's what I'm saying. Earlier, Coach, when I mentioned that people are poor by design, this is what it's all about. The education system that you are part of creating policy for. You send your kids overseas to the United States to get educated, and you leave the poor people in there. You send your family over to get health treatment, and you leave them right in there. So, yeah, I mean, I understand he's saying, that it's continuity and all that stuff, but it's been going on, like what the doc said early on, it's been going on for a very long time. And until somebody comes in, and real quick, before I swing it back over to you, Mr. Garley, real quick, if you look across Africa, all of the countries that are very poor, they have poor leaders, or they have presidents with poor leadership skills. You will see there's a correlation between that. And you'll see countries that are doing extremely well, they have very strong leadership in terms of the president. Pay close attention to that data.
Okay, well, folks, if you're just joining us, this is ASHFORD GARLEY Live on British Radio Africa. This program comes on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Fridays from 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 Central on British Radio Africa. I want to say a big thanks to Lawrence Kennedy. He has just a few more minutes to be with us. I will go back in the room and we can each ask him one question before we take leave of him. We have less than 20 minutes to be here tonight. I will begin with Dr. James D. Fisk.
Thank you once again for your participation, and the information that you provided has been very enlightening. You mentioned the importation of rice to Liberia, and we know the history of rice, the 1979 rice riot, and then the 1980 coup and the rest of it. I've argued that any competent government that would come in Liberia would do well by, number one, declaring rice a national security commodity, and then developing strategy for the harnessing, because Liberia has the rain, Liberia has the fertile soil to grow and produce rice to feed its own citizens, and in fact to even export. Okay. Now you've mentioned different kind of strategies in trying to get the market up and running. What would be something that you would consider ideal, other than declaring rice a national security commodity, as next steps to make sure that Liberia is self-sufficient in rice production, especially, and perhaps even become an exporter of rice? Thank you.
Great question. So you mentioned, Doc, you nailed it. I mean, we have an abundance of rain, but yet we still have a lot of the population not drinking clean, don't have access to clean drinking water. We have an abundance of sun that could be used for solar, but we have a good portion of the country in darkness. Yeah, we have very fertile soil, but yet we have food insecurity that's a little more than 50% of the population. It's kind of scary. So what can you possibly do? Well, that in fact, Doc, is a great question. You have to do several things all at once. The good news is we have all of the resources to reduce poverty and feed ourselves, because you need nutrition to put a lot of the young people to work. The bad news is you need a lot of money to do that. And the reason I say it is bad is because if you were to read the IMF report in terms of Liberia's debt sustainability, even though the IMF in one hand is saying Liberia is at a moderate risk of debt default, remember now it was debt default that got Ghana in trouble right now, but we're also at very high risk of not being able to make our debt payments. The reason I mention that is we need to borrow money. Liberia needs to borrow a lot of money, but that money has to go to very productive use. One of the things you have to work on right away is getting your sovereign debt rating. It's like your credit score. If you want to borrow money in America, in most places, you need very good credit score. Liberia needs a very good credit score. You have to start working on that. Meaning you have to invite like Fitch, Moody's, Standard and Poor's, even Dun and Bradstreet. You have to bring them to the country. They will take a look at your environment to see if this is something you can do. In fact, I did research one time, and it said because the population in Liberia was at such a level, it would require a lot of work. We need to borrow money. We saw they tried it with Eton. It was a fiasco. They tried it with Iboma. It was a fiasco. They've been borrowing a ton of money and receiving a lot of grants. But we need money, bottom line. You go back to what Coach said. If you are going to have some of these funds, right? If you set up some of these funds, well, the fund has to grow at a certain rate. So that means you have to take that money. You need a real good money manager. You can't have some of the fiasco that you see in the country because you can't take people money, go lend it, and then people are not paying the money back. So you need some very good money managers. But I mean, the only thing I can say, Doc, is we need to clean up our credit. We need to borrow a ton of money. We need to invest in education. And to get the agriculture sector up and running, let me tell you this real quick. There was a company in Florida. The company set up about $25 million for businesses in Liberia. This company was mainly about agriculture equipment. They set up a line of credit for $25 million for business in Liberia interested in doing farming to actually have a line of credit to purchase farming equipment and go and use that for mechanized farming. When I called the company one time, there were no business in Liberia taking advantage of that. It was sad. Another thing we can do, one of the first things that I started working as I was kind of partnering with the first lobbying firm for George Weah. And and we had a meeting one time in Washington, D.C., trying to help these guys connect and try to give them some strategies in terms of how to bring manufacturing companies over to Liberia. You can do it. Lesotho is doing it right now. You know how you do it, Doc? You take advantage of AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act. There are companies in Asia. We know globalization took a lot of the manufacturing jobs out of the U.S. You don't see a whole lot of factories in the U.S. It took a lot of the manufacturing out of the U.S. and took it over to Asia. But because the cost of labor is so cheap in Africa, you can bring some of those manufacturing jobs now directly out of Asia over to places like Liberia. And because Liberia has can take advantage of AGOA, now we can ship clothing, anything that is manufactured in Liberia, some of the items that are manufactured in Liberia over to the US without paying taxes. We don't take advantage of AGOA. I'm not sure why we don't take advantage of it, but we just don't do it. But again, one last thing we can do, we have to put a team together to actually win the MCC Compact. Put a team together to win the MCC Compact. We haven't really done a great job in that space as well. But the bottom line, Doc, Liberia needs money, and they need a lot of it to actually grow the economy. So over back to you, Mr. Garley.
Okay. Well, Coach Q?
I hope I answered Doc's question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Coach Q?
Yeah, so a few things. Wrote them down while Mr. Kennedy was talking. First thing is Liberia is ready and can reach this potential. We are at that level. I say this to say that other nations who were poorer than us at the time in the 1970s with less natural resources than we did, with less capital than we did, were able to do these steps, take these steps and become successful. Okay, Taiwan's and South Korea's of the world. I think a lot of times Liberians just talk without studying other people's nation. Okay, that's what expertise matters. The people who knows this should be saying this more. So I'm glad you're here, Mr. Kennedy. Economic visionary is what we need. We can't be talking about sovereign wealth funds, sovereign debt ratings, if this person as a leader don't even understand that. This is part of the reason why it's so vital to have an economic visionary, someone who quite understands the economy and not sublease that to somebody else like Tweb, who could just sit here and throw jargons out and people like, that one not true, that one are not true. And like Ms. Brooks said,
photography, see?
I mean, I beg you. Anyway, let Ms. Brooks said, there's no expert checkmating this guy when he talks, right? So when he sits there and just use words out of context, the Ellen government was really good for that, right? Same thing Joseph Boyka is going to bring back, just talking, making no sense at all. Capital flight. You talk about capital flight. Extremely important. Okay. When you have foreigners run your economy, every supermarket, every hotel, every high earning job is owned by foreigners. They remit that money back to their country as soon as they get in the pocket. So, no matter how much money we send out the diaspora to our people, is going out that leaking bucket. So I'm glad you talked about that, right? Subsidizing rice price right now. That is not how you run a capitalist economy. We're either a capitalist economy or we're not. Right? You're subsidizing rice and it's artificial and you're lying to the people. That's a lie. Okay, that's a lie that we're doing that. The United States, what they did during the war. Let's talk about World War II real quick, and I'll get to then I'll ask my question. World War II, the United States purposely. It's going to be quick. Then
I don't think you're managing the time right, Mrs. Rabbit, because we don't have.
You can't interrupt me on my.
No, it's over.
The man interrupted me.
And then he said,
"We're gonna host CSO." This is 10 seconds. 30 seconds. I promise. Okay. Two things. The United States have over $23 trillion. $23 trillion in GDP, right? And their lawmakers take home $174,000. Yes, Liberian lawmaker takes with $15,000 a month. They take home more than the United States congressman. I read the comment up here. That's ridiculous. Anyway, I'll stop here.
Coach, I mean, you said it. Do you know how many jobs we can possibly create in Liberia just in the construction space, just by setting up a mortgage industry, being able to give mortgages greater than 7 years? Right now, mortgages are very short term because of the risk, because the economy is not stable. I can't lock you in interest rate on a mortgage at say 7 or 8% if inflation is going to skyrocket a year or two from now. You can create, and the reason why I mentioned construction is because you don't need a large group of highly skilled people. You just need good manpower, and we have a lot of young people in there. So the construction sector will work well to get people back to work. There are a lot of people in the diaspora at that age now that are looking to build houses and retire in Liberia. You have to be able to tap into that, set up some sort of a mortgage program, some type of and if you're going to do, and coach, there's something you just made. If you're going to do mortgages, you need something in finance we call securitization. Otherwise, you will run out of money. What that means is you take all these mortgages, you package this into an investment loan that people can now buy, and that will recapitalize or put the money back into your bank. So we need securitization. I'm not sure. And this is something, look, I started working in the bank when I was about 16 years old. And I stayed there. I'm still in the banking sector today. And I've been in banking for over 35, 40 years now. That's all I've been doing in that sector, not just bank, but also in IT. But you can actually create some of these things in Liberia. And coach, you said it. The key is you need somebody at the wheel who understands international finance, not just, double talk and all kinds of stuff. And I think I saw a comment from one of your guests, Anthony Gay. He mentioned that capital flight is killing Liberia. Yeah, he's right. As long as the money come in, boom. The Lebanese people, they send it right out of the country. Take a look at the central bank report, the central bank annual report. Capital flight is killing Liberia. If you look at remittances coming to the country and remittances going out, sometimes the remittances going out is way higher than what's coming in. It's killing. Money doesn't stay in Liberia. Money does not stay in Liberia. So how will we be able to create jobs?
Thank you, Lord. Let me bring in the revenue that was added.
I just want to erect just one checkpoint because Dr. Fisk is acting not Dr. Fisk, Coach Q is acting as if to say Sovereign Wealth Fund is one of the brightest idea. And as a matter of fact, only Mr. Cummings alone has this vision, and that Joseph Boyka is talking nonsense. Let me just erect one checkpoint. the agriculture and investment industry, in which Liberia became the fastest, the second largest, fastest growing economy next to Japan. That era that happened in the 70s, it happened under the administration of Willamar Talbot. And in the early 70s, Lofa County was the breadbasket of Liberia. We had all of the cooperatives, the agricultural banks were created. The 17 experts went to Liberia and said that our agro-industry was doing very excellent under the expertise of the administration then until the coup took place. The reports are very clear. So, and that is why someone like myself supports Joseph Boyka. And as much as one may argue, he certainly brings international experience, having worked with FAO. The IMF report, as well as the UC report, say that we are chronically food insecure. And one of the ways to establish a wholesome functioning society, in the words of Willamar Talbot, is to build an agriculture industry. The Serving Well Fund first has to happen with a tremendous investment in your human capital and the ability to harness your natural resources, such as gold, iron ore, among several other things. Certainly under this administration, it hasn't happened. And we're looking forward to replacing this administration come October 10, so that Liberians can have an opportunity to enjoy the wealth of their country, as opposed to a finance minister fabricating information that is completely unrealistic to the reality of the lives of the Liberian people. I will stop in. I say thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for sharing light on this reality.
This is Letty Brooks Roberts.
I like your style, Mr. Addy.
Yeah,
Some very
thank you,
solid
Mr.
points. Solid
Thank you,
points.
Until you talk about Joseph Boyka, then that's a lot.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'll allow Lawrence to respond and Letty Brooks Roberts, please.
No, I mean, Mr. Addy really, it was more of a statement and just kind of making some clarification. But yeah, in terms of Liberia being chronically food insecure, that's being out there. But you know, the one thing, Mr. Addy, where do you get the money to develop the agriculture sector? That is the major challenge. That's going to be one of the biggest challenge, because if you pay close attention to the IMF and the World Bank reports, the current government they really borrowed a ton of money. I mean, people are not paying attention to that. Somebody has to pay that money back. The second you miss a debt payment, you're in deep trouble. Because, and people don't know this, but when COVID hit in March of 2020, the international community, IMF, World Bank, they all set up a sort of debt suspension program. Botswana was one of the only countries that didn't get in that debt suspension program in Africa. Liberia was in it because, we know COVID was a major blow, but we are at risk of missing a debt payment. This government has borrowed a ton of money. People are not paying attention to that. Our debt to GDP ratio is extremely high right now. So where do we get the money?
Billion.
Yes, where do we get the money to build the agriculture sector? And we know you can create a lot of jobs in agriculture. You can create a lot of jobs in like when the U.S. needs to create jobs. What do? They do capital infrastructure. They start building roads. Obama did it with the America's, I think it was some reinvestment program. Biden has been doing it. But when America needs money, they just print it, right? But Liberia, when we start printing money, what happens? It leads to inflation. But here's the deal.
Right.
Where would these politicians get the money from? That is the major question that we need to ask them.
Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Lord. Mrs. Letty Roberts.
But thank you, Mr. Garley. Mr. Kennedy, speaking of U.S. prints money, didn't we just print money, Liberia? Didn't they just print some billions of dollars? Where is that money and who accounts for it?
Printing money. Printing money is one of the most.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I don't want to be long-winded because of time, but I'm asking that question. We've had people ask that question. The Senate approved, I think, 60 billion that was printed. Pastor Adi, please correct me if
recently they printed $48 billion. Recently they printed $48 billion.
Thank you.
So
yeah, and then we also heard. I'm sorry. We also heard Len Eugene Nangbe say they get 30 million from the port. So get all this money, and you're telling us that we have not enough money to do agriculture. Please
So
enlighten us.
here's the thing. Here's the thing. Printing money is one of the most lucrative business that governments can get into because for in the U.S., for example, it costs about 10 cents to print like a $10 bill or 14 cents to print $100 bill. And then imagine now 14 cents. The rest of it is just profit. So printing money is very lucrative, and we know governments, when you give them the printing press, they will print as much money as possible because how much they sell the money or how much they put the money on the market for compared to how much they cost them to print it, that difference is called seigniorage, right? The difference, the profit. The problem is the more money you print, it leads to inflation. There's a correlation, there's a strong positive relationship between the amount of money in circulation and the prices of the goods and services in your economy. So you can't go all willy-nilly and start printing money because you're running into issues. We saw that in Zimbabwe. They had hyperinflation because Robert Mugabe got his hands on the printing press and he said, hey, man, let's just print money. By the time you're sitting in a restaurant in Zimbabwe drinking a bowl of soup, by the time you're done, the price had doubled. We saw it in Argentina. They did the same thing, just printing money all willy-nilly. But if you want to know what's happened to the money that was recently printed, take a look at the central bank annual report that just came out. That money is actually in circulation. The amount of money in circulation has gone up. That's why it is so shocking. We know there's a relationship between the money you put in the economy and prices going up. What's so shocking is, how come prices are not going up? Is somebody cooking the numbers? It just doesn't make any sense. So sometimes I don't trust the data. That's, again, the central bank, rather than get the data from ListGIS, they're getting it from the Ministry of Finance. So sometimes I just don't trust the data because it just doesn't make any sense. But to answer your question, the annual report from the central bank said that money is in circulation. And we saw when inflation ran up to about 30% over in 2019 was because all of that missing money, or part of it, based on the Kroll report, was in circulation. And one last point, this whole thing from the finance ministry about adjusting salary, they were forced to adjust salary because they wanted to enter the IMF Extended Credit Facility Program. Read the letter from December 2019 that Samuel Twelve wrote to the IMF. In that letter, he explained exactly what was going on in the economy. There was an influx of Liberian dollars in the economy, and you saw one USD to one LRD, it was over 200. The Liberian dollar became worthless, pretty much. It
is currently.
Yeah.
It is currently 200.
Thank you. Exactly.
Thank you.
So they put more money in circulation, and are they going to use it to for the elections? Who knows?
Thank you, Lawrence.
Mr. Garley, I just have a quick follow up, right? Mr. Garley,
we don't have
Larry,
have
as an
time,
economist, $200 at $1, does it make sense to invest in anything in Liberia right now with that rate?
Well, when Thailand tried to pull that stunt in terms of hyping up their currency, what people did was they waited until the currency actually adjusted, and then they challenged the currency. But let me tell you the problem with that whole $1 to $200 thing. The problem with that is it's a tax on the poor people. The poor people spend a majority of their income paying for fuel. And remember now, we don't have an environment where we have widespread electricity. We rely on generators, right? So when fuel prices goes up or impacted, the poor people suffer more. When prices go up, the poor people suffer more because inflation is nothing more than a tax, and that tax is hard on poor people. So that's why here in the U.S., the Federal Reserve Bank tried to keep inflation at around 2%. When it shot up to like 9%, you saw people in the country crying and complaining. In order to bring some of the prices down, President Biden had to tap the strategic reserve to put more oil in the market to bring the price of gas down, which impacted overall prices. We don't have that privilege in Liberia, So when prices rise, it's just bad for everybody. You know, it's especially for the poor people in the rural community, especially for the poor people. So,
thank you, Lawrence, and with Nasabi, we hope to see you some other time. Thanks for taking the time with your busy schedule.
I appreciate it, guys. It was a pleasure joining you all. You all have a wonderful evening, and I'll listen to the rest of the
Thank
program
you.
offline.
Okay. Well, folks, I'm afraid
Thank you, Glenn.
that's all the time we have to be with you tonight. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, enjoy yourself and enjoy the rest of the night.
I was just gonna say Joseph Boyka doesn't know what he's coming in.
I want to say a big thank you to our guests and of course to the panelists. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow night, same time, same place. Until then, tough times don't last, tough people do. The height of a man is never known until he rises because there's no second chance to make that first impression. Yours truly, the medicine of the microphone, the golden voice of radio. He doesn't eat iron, but he's definitely stronger than a lion. Africa's media doobie-doo extraordinaire. As for the giant, and now you know me, God. Have a great night.